Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. All right, everyone. Well, picture this. You're home on a Tuesday afternoon, the doorbell rings, it's the AC repair guy. In the old world, this meant burning vacation day, losing income, or frantically rearranging your schedule. But now, we don't really have to do that because it's all about remote work. Our guest today argues that we've been thinking about remote work all wrong. It's not about whether you're productive in your pajamas, it's about whether your company can tap into the single mother who's brilliant at customer service but can't leave her patient alone for 10 hours, or the disabled programmer who's more talented than anyone but can't navigate the building. So, our guest today is Ken Taylor. He didn't just write a book about remote work, but built a company on it from the ground up, growing from 3 people to 30 plus without a dollar of outside investment. It's very impressive, and he wrote a book about it, so all of us can learn from it as well. He's about to explain why the biggest companies in the world might be making a $1 trillion mistake. So without further ado, here's Ken Taylor. Time to talk about working in slippers. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Danielle. It's great to be here.
Of course. I think this is a really fun conversation. Our podcast is all about authors, but for the most part, authors, of course, also work from home. And I think more now than ever, we all value that flexibility. So I think it's going to be a fun conversation for sure.
Well, it is, and I think a fun life. There are people that don't really want to do anything except work, and that's fine. But for most of us, we do like to have something of a life that doesn't necessarily involve work. And we talk about work-life balance as if the two have to inherently conflict, and to some extent they do, but they don't have to conflict as much as I think we've become accustomed to over the last 100 or even more, 200 years or so since the development of the modern office space.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, everything, changed when the pandemic hit, but more now than ever, more companies are realizing, hey, we can be flexible with this type of thing. So that's incredible. But before we dive into the book and, your theories in that regard, I think it's important that we get a good background to who you are. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I understand that you kind of grew up in what you call a ringside seat to your father's tech ventures. So what did you learn from watching how his business approach shaped your understanding of building companies today?
Well, from two different perspectives. I know it's commonly understood that as tech founders, you're expected to fail a few times because you need to learn things. And there's probably some truth to that, but it's even better, just as the reason that we study history at all is to learn from other people's mistakes. And I had that opportunity, both my father's companies and then companies that he was a significant member of. Since I am not talking to you from my Learjet, I think we can say that they weren't as successful as some have been. And I've learned many reasons why that was so by observing his and by observing others. And then my own experience, and there's a million ways to fail, and there's fewer ways to succeed. So to learn those things not to do, things to watch out for, things that you need to be aware of, things missing pieces, I see that very frequently. One common assumption is that, I've come up with something so wonderful that everybody is just going to automatically want it. I don't have to do any selling. That does happen. It is very rare, but most founders are so in love with what they've come up with that they just sort of assume that it'll naturally work, and they forget that whole selling part of it, and then they run out of money. Well, we've developed it. Great. Where's all the money? Well, it doesn't work like that. So that's one of the things that I learned. But something else that I learned as a child was it's nice to have dad around. And, of course, sometimes dad isn't there because he's traveling to a business meeting. He's in New York or Tokyo or whatever for a week or two, and that's fine. But then when he's home, he's there, and he can have a presence. Now, in the old days, people maybe would, come home from work, the 9 to 5, and what are you home from, 6:30 or whatever. You sit down with a newspaper and the slippers, think about the classic movies. But that's not really the world we live in anymore. If you're working in the office, when do you actually get home? Well, 7 or 8 or 9 after fighting through traffic. And the last thing you want to do is deal with the kids. You want to sit down and rest your tired feet. And most of us, if we have a family, you'd actually kind of like to spend some time with them. And that's one of the things that remote work can allow, not in the sense that you're playing with your kids all day. I mean, of course, you do have to work, but just being able to dip in and out, the presence, the existence. And I think that's harking back to the way that for most of human history we have been. Think about, well, if you think about Little House on the Prairie, I mean, Paul Ingalls, he probably worked harder than any of us hopefully ever will have to, but he was there. His girls were around. He was out working in the farm, but he came in for lunch, or they would go out with him, or you bring a pie out to him while he's running the plow. So the integration between the family and work was much stronger than in many cases we have today, where there's this sharp delineation. When I'm at work, it's just me and my work, and my family doesn't exist. When I'm at home, well, in the old days, work didn't come with you, but it hasn't been like that for a long time.
Right. Yeah. Well, I really do love your perspective on this work-life balance. It's, important for us to realize that even if we are passionate about our jobs and we want to succeed and grow, well, we also need to make sure that we're spending time with loved ones and having time for our own well-being as well. So that's why I think it's so important that what you're doing here is affecting people all over, because it's advocating for that type of flexibility and at-home work. So really cool that it was shaped off of your own perspectives as well. So at what point did you decide, I have to put this all into a book to share with others? Because, clearly you've been building this for a while, but there had to have been a moment, maybe a catalyst, when you said, it's time to write it down.
Well, probably about 2 years ago, or a little bit more than that, the ideas started percolating around in my head. I like writing. I like to say I'm a generally fairly decent writer, but for me, the problem is always coming up with something that is worth writing. I was reading an article the other day about how on the internet you have so many posts and so many articles and listicles that they really don't contain any content. They're just sort of there. It's a waste of your time. I don't like writing like that. I want to have something worth reading and worth saying. But then when I do reach the point where I think I have something worth saying, then I do want to get that down. So it built through the course of my experience at OwnerRez, and then realizing, this is something that is not entirely unique, because everybody was forced to go remote, but we did it in a systematic way that so many companies are floundering or don't really feel comfortable or don't know what they're doing. I think there can be a real benefit in sharing that. And so I started the process of thinking it through and getting it down on paper, and now it's with my publisher and will be available to everybody here in just a couple of weeks.
Well, amazing. That's really cool. So I'm sorry, it's not quite out yet then, if you don't mind me.
That is correct. Well, okay. It is and it isn't. Technically, it's out on the 21st, but you can pre-order it if you go to my website or my publisher's website, workinginslippers.com. And if you pre-order it on Amazon or your favorite bookstore, and then you submit them your receipt, the publisher will send you free of charge an electronic copy, so you can start reading it right now. And then when you get the hard copy in the mail, you can put it on your bookshelf.
That is really cool. Well, guys, you heard it here then. I guess you just have to go ahead and click on over and get that pre-ordered copy. Start reading right away, because, the quicker you understand this mindset and what Ken here has to offer, well, the faster you can start instilling these practices in your own life. So thanks for clarifying that, guy. And we're going to put the links in the description box of this podcast today, guys. So you can go ahead and click on over. But yeah, let's dive more into the book a bit. You do have a pretty awesome philosophy that we discussed a little bit. You mentioned when I was looking through your materials that remote employees must be managers of one. So what exactly does that mean, and how do you identify those type of people?
Well, to be a manager of one means somebody that has the intelligence and character to identify what needs to be done within a relevant range, and then to do it without having to be told each and every precise specific thing. Think about the difference, for those of you who are parents, between, say, a 2-year-old and a teenager. Now, they don't necessarily, either of them, know everything that needs to be done. But if you're trying to get the 2-year-old to get dressed, you got each and every specific thing. Teenager, you probably don't even need to tell them to get dressed. They'll probably do that on their own, or you could give them higher level tasks. You give them the broad overall vision of what you want done, and they're probably competent to do it within some range. And okay, maybe if they're in a bad mood, they don't because they're a teenager. But that's speaking to with employees. We have all known situations and jobs where the point of the employee is just to do exactly what they are told. They are not supposed to bring a brain. Think about somebody, Lucy in the old movie with the assembly line wrapping the chocolates. There's not really a lot of intelligence there, which means that, well, she got bored or hungry, started eating all the chocolates, and that leads to other problems. But even in a manufacturing environment, you really want to make use of the employees' brains, because if they're sitting there all day, they will see things that management is not going to see. And if you empower them to use their brain and make suggestions, everything is going to run better. And in a remote environment, as a manager of one, give them the tools that they need, give them the guidance, the overall principles of what you're supposed to be doing as a company. And yes, of course, there's going to be rules, there's going to be policies, there's going to be procedures and parameters, but to give them flexibility to meet the overarching goal, whatever that is. In many cases, it is to make the customers happy. Now, that doesn't mean you have to give the customers everything for free. That makes everybody happy, but it's not very good for the business. So you're going to have some parameters, but within reason, they can make the decisions and do it in an intelligent fashion. And that means there's a whole lot less intense management that's required. You don't have to be looking over everybody's shoulder all the time. And it generally means that the employees are happier as well. But it does mean you have to choose employees that are more competent, that have better character, that are more qualified. And that means investing a lot more time up front in making the right choice and the right selection. Because fundamentally, the employees are very, very important. They're essential to the survival and success of the business. So how that is done is by spending the time, the high-level time, the management, the executives, carefully thinking through both the job description and the application process. The application process that a lot of companies use doesn't really get into that in an effective way of knowing who the employees are in a way that you can properly decide. And so our employment process was quite different than I think is very common out there. And a lot of people are dissatisfied with the employment process, and for good reason. And it is already changing. It's been changing for the worse. It needs to change for the better because it's not doing anybody a good service, both the employees and the companies. But at OwnerRez, we were able to be successful both for the company and also for employees, getting people in a way that they were happy in their role. And when you're happy in your role, you're always going to do a better job. It's just common sense.
Of course. Yeah, no, I understand completely what you mean by that. So that's a really cool concept, though, because I think it applies to a lot of us, but we don't quite, know until we define on those terms. And so that really goes to show exactly who would be best suited for this type of work and who wouldn't. But I guess another factor of this is trustworthiness, right? In order to make sure that person is self-sufficient and able to complete the task, you got to have a certain amount of trust between employees. So you do have a whole chapter on that, actually, trust but verify. Tell us a little bit about that, and how do you know if someone's just a mouse jiggler, as you described, versus somebody who's getting the work done?
Well, what you need to do, and this is part of the role of management and senior management, is what actually needs to be done. Now, many traditional companies have proxies that they have built up, but that are not really appropriate for what needs to be done. Think about the time clock. What does the time clock prove? Well, they prove that the person was physically present at such and such a time. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe their buddy just punched in their time card for them. Well, nowadays we use fingerprints to fix that. Does it prove that they were doing anything? I mean, no, they could have just sat in the break room all day, but hey, they were there, doggone it. Yeah, they were absolutely there. So you're not really inspecting something that has anything to do with productivity necessarily. What do you really want to be accomplished? Every single job is supposed to accomplish something or other. I mean, did the screws get tightened? Did the chocolates get wrapped in their package? Did the accounting entries get made? Was the software code written? Were the reports issued? Were tickets answered or phones answered or whatever? There is an actual work product that every job is supposed to produce. And then for all of those, there's some sort of a quality. Were the chocolates wrapped properly? Were the bolts tightened to the right tolerance? Were the reports accurate? Were the accounting entries, did the auditor, scream when they saw them? You have a way of knowing whether it was done and whether it was done correctly. And that's what you really should be measuring. There are, of course, some jobs where you do need to be physically present at the right time, but certainly for most office jobs, that's less important. It doesn't really matter. Okay, if you're having a meeting, are you there or did you not show up to the meeting? Well, that people will notice. But if you're not at a meeting, if you're just supposed to be writing a report, does it really matter? I mean, if you want to do it in the middle of the night, as long as it gets done and it's done correctly, who cares? So the thing with the mouse jiggler, if you are somebody that's supposed to be at the computer, working at the computer, and you're using a mouse jiggler, well, clearly you're not doing any work, but why is the mouse jiggler relevant? Shouldn't somebody be noticing that whatever it is that you're supposed to be doing isn't getting done? That's really the issue, jiggler or no jiggler.
Right. Okay. So it's a matter of, is it happening? Is the work being done? It doesn't matter what time of day. So I think that's really important because I guess there's some type of taboo between like, oh, like I should be at work right now, but I'm, running some errands. It's okay as long as the deadlines are met and everyone's happy and the work is still quality. So thank you for phrasing it like that. I think it's really important.
This is beneficial. It's obviously beneficial to the employee. You can bug out for a little bit to pick your kids up from school and then come back and do some more work. But it's also beneficial for the company. I suppose there probably somewhere around there's got to be some company that's so local that it only deals with people in its local district. But very few of us is that the case. Almost every company now, you're going to be dealing with customers or vendors or partners or suppliers in other time zones, in other countries, in other parts of the world. Well, what if you need to have a meeting with the team in India? Well, you got to stay late because there's a call at 8 p.m. Well, you just took a huge chunk out of somebody's day. They're going to have to stay in the office for an extra 4 hours. Nobody likes that. If you're working from home, well, it's not such a big deal. So you cut off at 4 p.m., you go in, you have dinner, you do stuff. And at 8, I got to bug out to my office for a meeting with India. It's not that big of a deal. The employee is not going to be angry or upset, and you have that flexibility to deal with your customers or your partners all around the world in a much more convenient way. So it's good for the company and for the employee.
Yeah, it's so important. So I do want to talk a little bit more about the book, but I also want us to transition a little bit into some writing tips as well for the authors out there today. Because, first off, this is a very interesting piece. It's a little bit unique, being that today's day and age, it's so much, remote work is becoming more and more prevalent. So people, years ago might not have even taken on this topic, and now you have. So it's kind of like you're treading new waters in a way with your writing. So does that affect the writing process at all? Sort of creating your own type of framework? Did it involve any research or plot design, anything like that?
Well, for my particular book, since it is about my own experience, there wasn't a great deal of research. I mean, I already knew more or less what I wanted to say. And just by reading the news, as we do, I encounter examples to cite. So it was not a heavily researched book in that regard. But my own personal writing process is, as I gather, a little bit different and unusual from many authors, certainly from many professional authors. We're all familiar with Stephen King, and perhaps many of your audience has read his book on writing, which talks about how he does his writing task and his writing career. And in no way am I going to criticize that, because obviously he has been enormously successful and it clearly worked for him. That's not how I do it, and I don't think that's why I have not been quite as successful as he is as a writer. I think it's just different people. For him and for many writers, they treat it as a job. This is my writing time, and it's 10 o'clock. I am going to sit down and I am going to darn well write. Well, that's not how I do it. For me, if I don't have anything to write, I don't write. Of course, it isn't my job, so maybe if that were my only job, I'd look at it differently. But it percolates around in my head, and when I'm doing other things, when I'm eating or taking a shower or lying in bed and haven't fallen asleep yet, it's floating around up there, and I'm kind of sort of composing it in my head. So, well, you can't see that. You don't know what's going on in my mind. When I'm writing, I'm not really doing the writing. I'm almost just transcribing what I've kind of already written in my head. And that's why sometimes it can take a while to boil over, as it were. And they're like, well, I've got like 2 whole chapters. I got to get them out of my head and onto the page. And then I'll block off time to, well, it's going to take me a little bit, so I'm just going to do that and sit down and spew it out into the computer. And then now it's out of my head, and then I'll worry about the next chapter, and it'll float around for a bit until it's ready to come out onto the page. That's not how most writers do it, from what I understand, but that's what works for me.
Of course. Yeah, no, I think that's really important that you mentioned that. And it's actually a really cool writing tip too. A lot of authors find it hard to sit down and actually have time to write, like large blocks of time to write things down. But if you're honestly and constantly reviewing what you want to write, thinking about the next chapter, well, I guess in theory, it makes the process go quicker if you're just transcribing it like you do. So that's a really cool tip, like the busy CEO who's always, on the go. Hey, think about that chapter. It'll be easier to transcribe it later on. That's so cool. You can always be brainstorming.
Absolutely. And nowadays we have all these people with the games. You're playing Candy Crush. Well, I got 5 minutes in the elevator and I can't do anything else, so I could play Candy Crush. Or you could stand there and be composing the next chapter in your head.
Right, yeah. Pull out your notes app on your phone and just, jot down a few things or transcribe it, as you said, whatever works best for you. Really cool stuff. I love that. So that's an amazing tip for people to hold on to and take with them today. But I think it's really cool to know you're also working on some other projects, which I'd love to shine a little bit of light on. I heard you're working on another book about dysfunctional hiring practices. Would you like to shine a little light on that for us?
Yeah, certainly. I'm co-authoring that with an executive coach that's a friend of mine. And in a way, it kind of fits into a recent interview that you did with Andreas Lutzow and Paul Dornan about AI. I believe that AI, and I'm not going to go off into futurology, and I'm not going to say what it can and can't do, but in the specific case of hiring, I think AI has led to some deeply dysfunctional processes because the processes have not yet adapted into the new world. Think about what we have now for hiring. Back even 20 years ago, I guess I'm old enough to remember the old days of when you would apply to a job. You would look in the newspaper, yes, a physical piece of paper with job ads, and you would see a job ad that looked interesting, and you would pick up the phone and telephone them. Well, how many people are going to do that? Yeah, couple dozen maybe. They're not going to be buried under. Then there came to be the job applications where you can apply online. Well, now more people could do it because the internet is global, but you still have to find it. You got to write your resume. You got to go through the process. Now you have all this automated stuff. You can hire companies out there to apply from AI. So it's not at all uncommon for companies to have thousands of applicants for an ordinary job, many of which are completely inappropriate because it was just AI reading the application. So in the companies on their side, they are using AI filtering the ATS tools, but AI has not got any actual intelligence. And I've been familiar with AI for, again, my whole life because that was the business that my father was in, and my first job out of college was involved in AI. It can pretend to be intelligent, but it is not truly intelligent. These filters, they look for keywords. They don't truly understand. And so what I have found with these filters is they will often filter out the very best applicants because what you want for an outstanding applicant, by definition, they are not like the rest of them, right? That's why they're outstanding, which means they're not going to be exactly the same, which means that AI is not going to find them just by looking for keywords. Only a human being can do that. But with the ATS systems doing the filters, you filter out the best. What they're looking is the exact cookie cutter of like everybody else that you think you have, which may or may not be what you want. And at the same time, you have all the applicants. Well, gee, I got to apply to 10,000 jobs to even get one. No human being can do that. So I'm going to have AI apply to all the 10,000 jobs. You have computers talking to computers. It's garbage in, garbage out. It doesn't work for anybody. I'm looking at, again, the historical, the history of how the personnel department and the HR departments and how things have changed over 50, 100, 150 years, and lessons that we can learn and ways that we can go to something that is going to be more productive and more effective for both sides, both for the companies as well as for the applicants.
Absolutely. One thing I love about your writing and your brand is that you're very much in tune with what's going on in today's day and age. Remote work is huge, AI is huge, and you're integrating that all just to make our lives not only easier, but more, beneficial in the long run for all of us. So I think that's really cool that you're integrating that. So great. I guess that's another project that we can all be on the lookout for. Is that also in the works of being published pretty soon, or is that something we should be on the lookout for by following your social medias?
I would say probably next year sometime. We have much of the book written, but there's a lot of work to be done, and then you have to go through the whole publishing process. And it's also true that things are changing rapidly, but that's where talking about first principles is important, because people don't change. I mean, individual people do, of course, but human nature does not change. The nature of motivations, the nature of the range and scope of people's emotions and interactions, it doesn't matter whether we were, cavemen or in Star Trek. The humanity is still humanity. And so you can learn from the past, and we have had things change. There have been revolutions before. There's been the dot-com revolution. There's the electrical revolution. There was the industrial revolution. In each of those things, new technology was adopted and found to cause huge problems, but also huge benefits, and there was great stresses and strifes until it shook out. Now we all understand how electricity works and how to use it. That took a while. And the same was true with .com. Fortunes were made, fortunes were lost. Everything's going to change. Well, no, not literally everything, but a whole lot. How is that going to work? Well, now, 20, 25 years on, we probably have a better impression of that. Things will still change. How is AI going to do? Is AI going to change everything? No, they always say that. Is it going to change a lot? Yes, it will. Are they going to guess right? Well, some people will, some people won't.
Of course. Right. Well, hey, I guess it's just important for us to stay on our toes and also to, read your books, get in the know, and stay up to date. So, where's the best places then, again, for people to get in touch and learn more about these upcoming projects?
Well, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can, I certainly check the reviews on Amazon of my book, but you can also communicate with my publisher through workinginslippers.com. And I've been very interested in dialogue or conversation, and I certainly do read all reviews that are submitted. I want to hear what people have to say, because every time I talk to somebody, I learn something. I know that's probably the number one takeaway is none of us know everything. We need to always be learning, and not everything we learn is applicable to our situation, but you never know what it might be in the future. So it's still good to file it away.
Exactly. Well, perfect. We'll put that in the link in the description box of this podcast today so we can all, get to know a little bit more and stay connected. I love that. So that being said, though, I have to know if you have any other bits of writing advice for the audience out there today, anything that perhaps they could take away with them and apply to their own writing as they continue forth.
Yes, and that is, I believe that organization is generally a good idea. Okay, if you're a poet, you can probably do stream of consciousness, and I'm not going to critique that. But I think most people can process any argument better if it follows a narrative and there's some sort of a logical structure so that they can pin it down into their heads. Most people can't juggle all sorts of things in their head very easily unless it's laid out very straightforward. So I like to have a strong organization, a good table of contents, putting things in the right order that's logical and consistent. And that is something where having an editor can be very helpful, because by the time your book is done, you've been immersed in it so long that it's hard to see the forest for the trees. And having a professional editor can really assist with that, with seeing the thing, well, how did I miss that? Well, okay, that's what the editor's for. I mean, even now, I'm in the process of going through a final review of my book, and I'm seeing a few typos. How on earth did I miss them after all this time? Well, I guess I had to step away from it for a while in order to see them. So I get one last chance to fix them.
Understood. I love that, right? Like, you always have to have that second lens, and maybe even asking somebody else to, take another look too is another important tip as well. You can't do it all on your own. You sometimes need that second pair of eyes, and be careful about what you're doing. So thank you for sharing that with us. It's something that we often overlook. We know that it's important, but we sometimes overlook it. So that's perfect. Well, hey, this has been a really insightful conversation. Like I said, everybody these days needs some insights about working from home and AI. We're all dealing with it. So it's very crucial that we learn a little bit more about it. I appreciate you coming on and chatting with us today, and also sharing some awesome writing tips. It's been a pleasure.
Glad to be here. I'd love to talk with you again and your audience and hear from them all.
Of course. Yeah, definitely. And we'd love to have you back on and hear more about the project when it's closer to its release date. Amazing stuff.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, guys, if you're interested, again, we're going to put the link in the description box of this podcast today. And in the meantime, if this episode got you thinking, then share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Your boss, your co-founder, a friend who's been miserable in their commute. And, check out Ken's work. It's some really important stuff. And until next episode, everybody, the question remains, are you going to take this and apply it to your own life? Or are you going to continue with your day-to-day? Let's see how you can implement what we learned today. Maybe, just keep those slippers handy, right? We'll see you next time on the Authors on Mission podcast, everyone. This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.